software, that's fine too. But my goal for tonight was originally to get us playing with some of these tools to see how we can start to one participate in just completely at home meetups as well as contribute to the virtual DDD environment and all of the other teams out there that are trying to get a bigger ecosystem up. So we had done back in February a meetup that was event storming. Let's do an introduction to it. Let's play with some stuff. We at the time we had presented three options. Let's do two software domains. One was the library example that has been running for a few years, more than a few years, for quite a few years, probably 10 years, almost 10 years, 2011, something like that. And then the next one was around an event scheduling system for sporting events and all of the things around how do you do kids and adult sporting events. So softball leagues, kids soccer leagues, etc. Always a pain, always all these tools hodgepodge together. What do we build something new? The third was let's ignore software altogether. Let's just use a fairy tale example, which is one of those things recommended. Paul, Alberto, they say, hey, just do something out of the ordinary. You'll get all of the same concepts that you will experience in a software project, people trying to piece together the information, and you can just have a conversation and just forget about software for a while. And there were about 9 or 10 people, and that's what we did. So the team chose, of the handful of options, chose Cinderella. It was the most well-known, and we went through and tried to piece together the story of Cinderella in an event storming session and created one heck of a giant map. And over the course of 2.5 hours, we ended up with, if you are online right now on the Miro board, we ended up with what was step one, gather events from current team understanding. So we had a full list and we talked through the steps of event storming, the basics behind it as a collaborative tool, etc. If you're not familiar with those, raise a hand and say, hey, let's go back over that, and we can. But the goal at the time was, naively, let's get through all the steps of what a good session would be and how do we use it for building new things. But all we got to was identifying events and a ton of great conversation. On the board here today, I have captured all of the sticky notes and white big post-its that we captured from the event, and I posted them up there. But all we got to was creating an initial map. And what I mean by that is that the initial map was the sum total of everyone's experience with the story of Cinderella, what they knew about it, what they remembered, how they understood the story, and all of the events in it. And that's where we got. So just everybody mapped out the story as they understood it. Then they took it to the boards. We put it up on the boards and we left it. The next steps were to be, let's go through, let's understand the big gaps in the story. Let's understand where there's duplicate events. Let's create one unified map of understanding and get to a place where we can start to see how things are playing out. So like I said, it was 2.5 hours for the story, and we got into things like, what are the stories of the sisters? What are the stories of the stepmom? Do we care about the background behind how Cinderella got to where she was? Do we care about the story of the royal family and how that could impact the system? I mean, those are all things that we can play with in terms of you start off discussing all these things, and we talk about later on, is there some unknown something we learned that we didn't expect to learn that could represent some unknown bottleneck in the system where there's an absorbent amount of value that we never anticipated before. And are we focusing on the wrong spot? All these ideas around how do we learn from these maps. So that's where we started. And at the end of this time, we got to a place where everybody mapped out their story, but we didn't dedupe. We didn't cull the map, all those items. So the goal for tonight, with me putting this in Miro, was, for those interested, can we figure out how to take the initial map, which I copied into step 2, call the events, rename them for clarity, walk through the system, and start looking for emergent structures in terms of parallel processes, things we don't care about, things to the story that are germane or totally irrelevant. If the things are irrelevant, are we creating notes to say, this is irrelevant to me? Is this irrelevant to you? And how do we look at creating a very concise story so that we can move on to things around actors and systems, and then going on to next steps, building story maps, etc. Some of that doesn't quite make sense in terms of Cinderella, but we can play it out from there. I wasn't quite sure. Thoughts? I'll stop talking now. That was a lot.
Let's try it out.
You have links to things you're viewing?
Oh yeah. If you go to the meetup site, Patrick, let me post this in the Zoom chat. The link that has both the link for Miro and Jira. 1 second. Chat. There you go. So if you go to that link on meetup.com, in the chat section at the bottom, the comment section has links to both Miro and Zoom. Well, Zoom, obviously. All you care about is the Miro one.
Perfect, thank you.
Details.
Hopefully the Zoom one was part of the fun.
There's a little bit of an Inception play right there. Like,
well, Meetup, Paul, you're very quiet now that you're on that piece. The other piece is that
check.
I wasn't quite sure. I put it in the comments, the Zoom link, because it said only people that have RSVP'd can see the link.
Oh.
But often we get people that don't RSVP, so I wanted to add it to the comment so that folks could just show up. But I removed all passwords, all access. Not that I care, but anyway.
Right, can you hear me okay? Like, how close to the mic do I need
just
to be?
low, but yes, we can.
Okay.
Is it low to everybody else? Is it quiet to everybody else?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to sit it on it.
One note about Miro for folks who are new to it is it can be easy to accidentally move stuff. So if your cursor looks like an arrow, that means you can move stuff. You can toggle with V to a hand, and that just lets you move without accidentally moving any of the cards. Or if you're in select mode, the arrow, you can just hold the spacebar while you move and then let go, and it'll go back to the edit option.
Yeah,
So
remind me again how you do like a multi-select.
It's shift, hold shift, and then drag with your mouse. Yeah.
Right.
So question for you, Edward, now that you've used this quite a few times. So in my head, I was like, okay, you can see, if you zoom back enough from the screen in Miro, you can see logical breaks in sessions that kind of created the wall up there. There's 7 of us here. I don't need to touch the board for this particular exercise, but we want to dedupe, clean up, clarify. Normally that's a collaborative exercise. From what you've seen, would you have, or this is a question to the group here, I can draw vertical lines between sections because I put them in, so I know there's a lot of dupes around creating, and there was not enough questions generated at the time. We talked a lot about it, and stickies were not created. So you'll as you read through some of the notes when you zoom in, you can see questions or places where people had very, like this is kind of goofy. There's a question here that was wanting to be generated but didn't get generated. I can segment off and people can go through on their own and look at that. Or how would we go through this as a team? We're only 7 right now, and it's already complicated. Walking through, like, would you have, I could draw lines vertical through it and say, hey, Dave, go through these 20 cards, let's talk about them. Gordon, go through these 12 cards, let's talk about them. Or would you say, I'm going to draw lines, go individually, call up the cards, remove the dupes, look at asking clarifying questions, and let's go look back at it. Any thoughts?
Can I suggest something, and we can just run an experiment? Please. So what I understand is you've taken a copy of everything from step 1 and you've just duplicated that down under step 2, right? So we do have a backup copy if we mess this up completely.
Correct.
How about we go for a couple of minutes just without it? So I do this sometimes, is like do some kind of grouping exercise or something like that where people don't actually talk, they just work on it, and then we kind of see where it goes from there. So we could do something like for 3 minutes or something like that, whatever the time would be, individually, just take all the sticky note, like each person kind of walk through the sticky notes in that are down under step 2 there where it says clean the map and look for emergent structures, and then just put, try to sequence them in a horizontal sequence in terms of what you think the story is. But we can do that without talking. So and if there's one you're not sure of, maybe just use a pink sticky to indicate that like you're not sure of that. And if you see a duplicate, unless it's an exact duplicate, then maybe just put them on top of each other so we can have a conversation around those in terms of the language. So for example, there's father died, dad died, and Cindy's dad died. One of those is probably the best, but without a conversation, we probably, like if someone just deleted 2 of those, we miss the opportunity to kind of talk about the differences in language. So do you want to just spend a few minutes doing that just as an experiment and see how it goes?
Would you do that? Normally we would do that with the one board, and it's everybody just moving things around.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm proposing is the analog to what I would do in a real workshop, is just...
So don't create a separate copy of the full stream for everybody and have them play with it themselves.
No, I think like this is a point where we're trying as a group to sort of come up, like, because you're basically modeling a process, right? So so this is where we're trying to sort of produce something that's a little bit more of a sequence. And if you're not sure what it is, then like it's just the thing I like about EventStorming is it's a iterative kind of approach. So it's like, well, we've made a mess, let's do a little bit of cleanup, and then let's see, based out of that, it'll be clearer where the gaps are from there. So do you want to give that a shot? Is that a thumbs up from people?
Yeah. And Miro's good for this because you can see exactly where everybody is, and if I try to grab a card, whoever grabs it first, it'll kind of lock it to them temporarily until they let go. So we shouldn't step on each other too much.
Mine.
I'm missing a count. Who am I missing? I'm missing Patrick. Oh, there you are. Never mind. There We're good.
All right. I'm gonna watch a little bit. I mean, I'm sure I can understand the events of Cinderella, but I just kind of want to watch how you're doing this.
Good question. Have you done? Gordon was in the last workshop. Dave knows it. Paul knows it. He teaches it. Ed knows it. Patrick, are you familiar with what we're doing at all? I can give you an overview of the background.
I mean, I am in terms of reading blogs for the last 2 years, trying to, I'm very self-taught. So a lot of what I read a lot of Martin Fowler a couple of years ago, and he talks about DDD and EventStorming basically every other sentence. So I want to immerse myself.
Cool. Whoever added the Once Upon a Time, I love it.
That's good.
That's the first event there, right there.
Well, that implies that they lived happily ever after, but they lived together, so we can assume the outcome.
Well, no, I'd recommend if you think of an event that's not up there while we're doing this, just add it. One of Alberto's rules with EventStorming is only discuss visible things. So if you think, there's something missing, just add it on there, and then.
Right.
Are we doing the Disney version with mice, or are we doing, there are multiple versions?
To me, that's the interesting thing last time is that everybody had a slightly different version. Sort of everybody had the canonical Disney version, but I have 3 daughters, so I've read, 15 different versions of this in various storybooks, and then it's like, and everybody remembered it a little differently. And then there was the question of like, when did the father die? And that was really interesting because it's like, you think, oh yeah, Cinderella, everybody knows the story. And then, we went down some rabbit holes of,
which is a pretty good analog for a real domain, for a real software product, right? Everybody has a different understanding of what the hell this thing is supposed to do.
I mean, honestly, when we picked it, it was a little bit of an eye roll on my part, but then it's like, wow, this is, yeah, I mean, exactly, that was exactly it. It's like, yeah, this is how these stories, we're kind of working backwards where, normally you're building a story. And here it's like we were trying to tell a story and took a story we all knew and tried to turn it to software. So it was actually a really good, I thought this was a great example.
So the go to ball here, that's a command I see. That's not in the area of all the other go to ball stuff. So
I said just move it.
Oh, just move it. Okay. I didn't know if it was treated differently than some of these others.
This is where so I went back through, I couldn't find my big giant paper roll. So I had Post-it notes and walls, and we had to reestablish a sequence, and from the pictures I took, and some things were just out of sequence based on people who misremembered. So the point of getting to point number 2 is after everybody shares, well, backs up. So you can do it such that everybody writes down and works together to create their shared view. Or you can do it from a moment where it's everybody sits back and writes their own version of how they enter the system and then combine them together. I've seen both work. I've seen actually accidentally where I've had people start off in a big group together and then the forced clicks separate, where business goes off to themselves and business talks about it and tech goes off to themselves and talk about it. And I've taken pictures of 2 groups of people that have largely separated and have to reestablish the full map that comes in. So it's about, are you asking everybody to create their shared understanding first and merge, or ask people to sit back and work together to create it at the same time? So that's probably a flavor thing with your own group, but I prefer everybody create your own shared understanding first. Let's merge it together, because you get less bias. You get people who are normally introverted that we can get their information into the map itself, and that you just end up with different understandings, and then you got to clean it all up. Anyone else? Anything to share?
Does anybody put forward the Anne Rice? Oh, no. That wasn't Cinderella. That was Sleeping Beauty, right? Never mind.
All right. So
how did the command sneak in there? I'm just curious how that particular type already showed up when you were that early in the process.
We discussed creating a key such that it's not necessarily that you want to force one particular key on everybody and not want to ignore what works for your team, but it was a goal about being explicit in what you're trying to convey so that everybody had a shared language and a shared set of tools to create information from. So I had mentioned what it was, and there were people that kind of understood what we were trying to do, and then used those stickies to put only a handful of notes out there, which is quite funny, because after it was used, it's like, oh, I get what you're saying. I'm going to take one and put it up there, even though there was plenty of places to slide in commands later.
Mm-hmm.
And Gordon was there for that event. It was a really eclectic group of folks. It was a handful of, and I'm not complaining, it was wonderful. It was some senior engineers, some very, very junior, right out of school or code camp engineers. We had a gentleman from a very experienced engineer from San Fran who was in town for the week with his company, just wanted to pop in. He liked the topic, and just sat back and didn't do a lot of stickies, but did a lot of just waxing philosophic. So it was a very fun discussion. Like the sticky I want to add about Anastasia going on Prozac probably is invaluable.
So just so people know, when I teach EventStorming or when I run a workshop, I'll always do a warm-up exercise because I found it helps break the ice. So I just do it as an icebreaker. And so Cinderella I found is a good choice for that, but you could use any kind of story or anything people are familiar with. Like it could be like, oh, you know, buying an ice cream or buying a coffee or some story that people would know. But just an icebreaker to at least introduce events and writing events in the past tense and getting people comfortable with the idea of individually brainstorming a bunch of events and then putting them up on the wall and then sorting them into a rough timeline.
And I'll add, one of the conversations that continues to come up in my space is around how do you get business partners to want to come to this? And one thing we learned the hard way was scheduling business folks for an entire day workshop does not go well. What I brought up the last round, which is that we've had great success with EventStorming in Nordstrom's credit space. And the reason when we started to see the success was when we started we would schedule our workshops for a handful of days. We look at our business partners and find every half hour or hour break that they had that they did not have booked already, even 2 weeks in advance. And we schedule them for that half hour, an hour here or there. And they would come to these, they would see the value that was happening from discussion, and they would clear their calendars to show up. So one possible thing, if you run into it, is just get an hour with somebody, have them start, give them the taste like the crack cocaine dealer you are, and they'll come back for more because it is very effective.
Well,
yeah, and I've even had pretty good luck just selling it as when I was working in internal technology with compliance and legal, just saying like, we have new developers on the team and they want to understand your space better and how you guys actually do your work day to day and how our technology supports it. In a few cases, that was enough to get them to say, all right, we'll give you 2 hours if we think we can get something valuable out of it.
Well, just a time check on this. So been going for a few minutes and it's noticeably cleaner than the one above it. Like if you zoom out, you can kind of, like as a facilitator, I often just sort of step back from the wall and sort of squint a little bit and try and get a feel for what people are doing. You can see there's still a lot. What I notice is that like the front's fairly clean, the back part of it is fairly organized, but there's still a lot of activity and around where Dave and Patrick and Edward are right now, which is the fairy godmother, and then on towards the slipper stuff.
I will say this is pretty cool that it works so well with even 7 people involved.
Yeah, I mean, I thought what was great about the group last time is that, yeah, there were a bunch of perspectives and what people thought was important. And, you know, me, like I say, I thought I knew the story really well. And I sort of sketched in broad strokes, and other people just all these minute details. Like, oh man, I forgot that happened, you know?
Yeah, the thing
Now thinking of the...
Go ahead, Dave.
I was just thinking of the Shrek reimagining of the fairy godmother and her motives.
Well, you know, that could be valid, you know? I guess that's fun too, is it's just like how everybody remembers the story.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I think from a business case, it's like how everybody imagines the story. Because I know that, you know, again, with Sunrun, I sort of make up I've barely worked with our site designers at all, and sort of make up these stories in my head about how these guys actually work. And then I find out it's like, oh no, that is absolutely nothing at all what our day is like.
Right.
So as fun as this is, I think my son would really like my attention. So I think I'm going to get out of here. So.
All right. Thanks, Dave. It's so good to see
What are
you.
playing, Dave? We need to know.
Nice to meet you.
What did you say, Josh?
We need to know what you're going to go play.
I'm going to go play. It's probably going to be FIFA.
Nice. I'm in a Zelda a Zelda world with Breath of the Wild with my daughters. They love it. I'm
Yeah,
doomed,
fun.
I'm doomed to repeat my own mistakes in life.
Indeed. Yeah. So yeah. Good to talk to you guys, and see you later.
Thanks, Dave. It's good to see you.
You too, Paul.
Good.
Well, at this point, what I would probably do is just like a high-level walkthrough as a facilitator. Josh, it's your call on how you like to do this. So, okay. So there's just a few things. What I like to do is sort of, okay, let's call time on the organizing bit and then just do like a high-level walkthrough of the overall process and note any gaps and sort of things along the way. So just to sort of tell the overall story. So imagine it's a little bit like, when Pixar are developing a new movie and they do the screenplay, like the initial screenplay with all the sketches, they do like walkthroughs every day of that. So I sort of think about it this way. So right at the beginning, you've got Once Upon a Time. She grew up. When I see duplicates, it's usually an indication that it's a fairly memorable event, especially the more people you have. So out of like these four, so there's a whole bunch, there's four of them that say something along the lines of her mother died. So is there one that stands out to people as the best one?
The one that just says "mother died" is the best one for me.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay, that one's good too because it's also in the past tense, which is the convention for events, rather than her, like C's mother dies implies it's a present tense, kind of like it's a little bit more in the present tense. And then her mother didn't really ditch her.
No.
So
Yeah.
okay, so we could just consolidate down to this one. So that one goes there, and then that one. We don't have to do all the others, but that's generally what I do in terms of duplicates. Is sometimes there's interesting differences in language. These ones about all it's it's a Disney story because the parents die, right?
At least one.
yeah.
So what's interesting to me?
Are addicted to crack cocaine. And they all go off into it. Yeah, understood.
So here's where it gets interesting because I wasn't sure about this, is like her dad remarried. That's where she gets the stepmother. Her dad died and then she was reduced to servitude. Is that the way the story goes?
Yeah, it's like the stepmother's true nature is finally revealed or something.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if you have your own daughters, why would you care about this other waif, right?
Right. So then we probably only need, like, we've got. So does somebody want to like just pick the best out of the remarried and the died ones and kill the others? We can keep moving on. So the next one's interesting to me because it's actually interesting variations in language. Like in a real event storming session, this would be one that I would find fascinating. Is like reduced to servitude. She was enslaved. She became a maid, and ES is the evil stepsisters, right?
I honestly feel like out of all these, including the next row, the ES in charge is really the big thing, because that's like it's establishes this new regime. And again, to the point of, did the sisters matter? It's kind of like the sisters are agents in this. The discussion I remember having last time was that Cinderella was passive throughout the whole thing. Things just happened to her, And then we got into this discussion of the stepsisters, and do they even matter? They're just sort of agents of the stepmother's will, but they're, on their own, they're not really contributing much, except that they're doing what the stepmother wants. So, and and again, to all the thing about she's mistreated, whatever. It's just like, well, that's just a condition of the system, but
Yeah, thus far it's been conditioned, and the whole point of Cinderella is the girl of cinders she's the maid. She's the person who is forced into taking care of the rest of the house. and that is her role in life based on the situation that's arrived. So if we care about calling out identity, there might be more than just ES in charge, but other than that, totally applied.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the Disney one at least, it's memorable that the mice are like taking stuff that the stepsisters didn't want anymore to build the dress. The stepsisters are the one who destroy the dress, and the stepsisters flirt with the prince, and the stepsisters. I remember they try to get the slipper on their feet, and their feet are too big, and they just like pop off. So I mean, I don't know whether those events are meaningful enough that we feel like we want to include them, but those things all do involve the stepsisters.
Mm-hmm. So one of the nice things about event storming is like you don't have to decide right now if those things are important. You can just add them to the map. And a lot of that, if it's a real business process, is like trying to figure out for the people that are in the room what's important to them in terms of that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just
an interesting sidebar on where the "Do the Sisters Matter" question came from was around the fact that what was it was an empathy exercise in terms of what was the stepmother and her family's role in society at the time. How did they get involved with this other family? Where did they come from? Where did they go? What were they trying to accomplish? And then in the end, some other interesting topics. And the question was, is the whole stepsister story valuable to this particular conversation? How do we look at this going, understanding forward from what we've learned? And the goal is looking at an event map in the software. Would the stepsister story be something we should focus on? Or is it wholly unapplicable right now for what we're trying to accomplish?
right.
Yeah.
So
And in a real business conversation, that would be up to the facilitator, right, to direct the room to say, okay, is this something that's pertinent to everyone? Do we need to like take it offline? Do we just need to mark it as a question for later? Do we need to do we parking lot it? If there's a few people that are really interested in that, then maybe they form a breakout group and go off and work on that separately.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
my real world analog to this is I do a lot of work with Salesforce, and I'm sort of like all the toiling and mopping and stuff like that. That's over in Salesforce land. I honestly, I know there's a lot of suffering happening over there, but I don't really care.
There's no one that works for Salesforce on this call, right?
No, but I mean, this is my view of the world, right? It's kind of like all that happens over in Salesforce land. And, I know there's a lot of suffering going on there, but it's just like, I have my little interface. Let's just focus on that. And, people get a little, I don't know, the team lead had me on the phone today. He's like, well, how's the deployment work? I'm like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about we just keep going through like high level at least. So if people notice things, we can capture with them with pick stickies. So,
the prince doesn't actually arrange the ball like the king did because he thought the
Right.
prince needed to get married.
oh,
So my question with that though is isn't arranging the ball, that's where the two stories converge, right? Because up till then, the prince doesn't have any involvement with
right.
Cinderella's family,
Yeah.
right? And so it's kind of like, do you do that as a separate row of stickies above? Is there a synchronization point? I mean, I don't know how detailed you get.
So as we start looking for emergent structures, the whole idea of parallel processes that have no impact on what we're actually doing in the life of one workflow start to evolve.
Yeah. So if you see, the general convention is if you have like the example here of dad remarried just prior to father died, right, earlier in the sequence. So that generally implies that not so much that A causes B, like that the dad remarried causes that the father died, because we know that's not the case, right? But there is a sequence there that the dad remarried happened before he died, right? If we swap those two around and father died, father remarried, like that doesn't make sense, right? And then a general convention that tends to evolve very commonly is that if you have two events that are sitting on top of each other, one like right on top of each other usually means that there's some kind of duplicate. Whereas like this one later here, it says Herald announced ball, wicked stepsisters learned of ball. that implies to me, seeing the way they're arranged, that those things are sort of independent of each other, which is probably not the case, unless they learned about the ball not through the herald, right? So when things are kind of stacked like that, then it generally implies that they're independent of each other. And then if you have like two sequences of events that are that form two kind of swim lanes, then that generally implies that those two sequences are independent of each other. That's a common convention that develops.
Okay. Well, then that makes I'm definitely happy to say that let's change this to maybe, I don't know, royal ball announced or something. I'm happy to have that be a separate swim lane.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Let's do that. We've got Cinderella reduced to servitude, and then we've still got stepmom enslaved her, Cindy became a maid, evil stepmother in charge. Do we want to just get rid of all of those and then put the do the sisters matter somewhere around the servitude, or do we feel like there's distinctions there?
Well, from an actor perspective, the sisters matter because the stepmother is trying to marry off her daughters over Cinderella.
Yeah.
And that's I mean, you know, I don't know if motivation matters, but that's why she is the way she is.
Yeah, I mean, like in the standard storytelling, I don't feel like the sisters have a whole bunch of agency, but you know, they are definitely a reason for things to be there. You know, again, going to torture a tech metaphor, but it's like they're the legacy system. The reason for the friction in the system.
This is where we get to talk about, do things really matter? Does the fact that the stepmom is in charge, or she's enslaved, or she's a maid really matter? Or does it matter just that there's a problem in her space and we all move forward?
Okay.
Hmm.
I just have to drop off to do a couple of family things for a few minutes. I'll be back.
Thanks, Paul.
I think Cinderella's reduced to servitude kind of covers all of those.
That's kind of what I'm leaning towards as well.
Support that. Anyone disagree?
If we delete all three of these,
Make it so.
Yeah.
boom. We'll move this here. And I guess we don't need this order question anymore, right? Because we are...
Right.
Do we need this detail about what she did and that she was mistreated?
I'm the one who stacked all that stuff, and I feel like no. It's I stacked it all, and it's just like these are conditions within the system, but it's like I feel like they add character to the story, but I don't feel like they really change events in the story at all.
Any disagreements with that? I can still Control Z.
That's good.
I'm not sure what this red, why did he do this is referring to.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the specific context. The only thing I can think of is why did he announce the ball? But I don't know. I don't remember the context around that one.
Different stories. One, the Disney one made it be like, hey, I need you to find someone to take my place. And the older historical stories were around, I'm about to die. You can't go forward. You gotta prove yourself to be a man. That's what I remember anyway. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I remember.
Yeah. It's kind of the reverse of what's the one about the Aladdin, where it's like the princess had to marry somebody because that's what you did. And I think it was doing the same thing. kind of assumed context, I think, in general, is like back then, yeah, you got married. You couldn't be a king without a wife, without a queen.
All right. So there's this one where it says ball was organized and Cinderella wasn't invited. And I did rewatch it not that long ago for the specific purpose of doing one of these to to help people remember. So they said she could go, but only if she finished all of her chores and had a dress. And they basically overloaded her with so many chores. They were like, "There's no way you'll ever get this done."
Much.
That's actually an interesting thought. Is like you just saying overloaded is like, you know, that's an interesting event where, you know, all this stuff. Okay, so I guess, you know, the whole thing that we deleted this whole stack of she was overloaded, but it's like this is the reason she couldn't go to the ball, is that in one, sure, she was overloaded throughout the duration, but at this one specific instance, it's like this was what was causing her. She didn't meet the conditions she needed to meet to go to the ball. And, you know, and you know, in the Disney version, the mice, you know, the little mice and the birds help her out and make the dress and da 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 da. But you know, so yeah, she like scrambles in and meets the deadline. You know, she makes the sprint demo, right? But
are you saying that Disney lied? The mice couldn't do that for her?
Well, you know, in their particular version, you know, they always had animal helpers, but
yeah,
the real world, we just
be like a rat's nest made out of twigs and hair. Be gross.
Yeah, we just catch nasty viruses from these animals. So. Gotta wonder what kind of Disney story is going to come out of this whole event.
Wall-E, wasn't it? The world, and all of our small businesses are lost, and Amazon takes over the rest of the world.
Yeah,
pretty much on a path to Wall-E. Yeah, I read a really depressing article today on how this event is really the death of the remaining small businesses in America, and that frustrated me as a supporter of small businesses and having grown up working for my parents and their attempts at small businesses in the Chicago area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to distract from the event, but can't shake it for some reason.
No, that's a good point. I mean, I've made up my mind in the last few days that it's like, you know, yeah, I mean, I'll order from Amazon for some things, but on the other hand, it's just like, you know, some of these other places need my business. I just bought a new monitor today. I went to Micro Center. It's like I could have ordered it from Dell, but it's like, I'm gonna give Micro Center some business. And I have to say, first of all, from the line at Micro Center, you wouldn't know that there's a quarantine in effect.
Yeah.
It took me 45. And on the other hand, those guys aren't messing around. It's like they have a line. You show up and they're like, scan this thing, sign up, go back to your car and wait. Don't wait here in front of the store. You walk in the store, there's a girl there with hand sanitizer, squirts your hands. She's like, hold out your hands, squirts your hands. It's just like,
nice.
Yeah. I mean, everybody in the store is masked. Those guys are taking, yeah.
I love Micro Center. Patrick, do you guys have Micro Center in Austin?
There's one in Dallas, and I just went recently. And I mean, I was impressed, but everything is on Newegg, so I don't know how they're franchised. I would have to know that before I would claim that, you know, I'm willing to spend local money on that.
Understood.
Yeah.
The joy of having just about anything and everything at your fingertips, including refurbished gear, at a local store that's 10 minutes away is beautiful.
Yeah.
I got ruined by fries.
Yes, I was going to say you.
I thought it was going to be great. It never was great.
Oh, really? Oh,
And now it's dead. Fries
In
is
Texas or in California?
in Texas.
Texas.
I didn't know
It's-
that it. I've been to Fry's in California on work trips and loved it, but there are
But
certain.
this is a recent thing. So
Didn't know
not
that.
to derail, but they've been having a really bad problem with actually sourcing like products from China. All of their supply chain was screwed up in the last 2 years for lots of reasons, I'm sure. Yeah, the trade war has really screwed them over. And so they were moving to a different like distribution model and trying to turn all of their stores into more of warehouses and try to do shipping like a lot of companies are having to. And I don't know if they're going to make it through that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they really spiffed up their Las Vegas story last year for CES, but I think that was the death knell right there.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Fries was the deal, man.
You guys have been busy.
They're still open if you need a soldering iron for twice the price
Yeah.
from Hacko.
Yeah.
How do you guys think to handle concurrent? So there's a point where the fairy godmother shows up and she talks, and then she turns the dress or creates the dress. She turns the pumpkin into a coach. She changes the coachman into a horse. The mice get changed into horses, and the dog changes into a footman. I think there was even one more, but it all kind of changes. Like it all happens at once.
A lot of side effects.
Does it?
Because it was software people. No one cared. Like this didn't matter to the system. Like if it mattered to the story to entertain people, it was all individual events. But it became a thing of no one gives a crap. Magic happened. Girl went to ball. The world is happy.
So there is, I mean, at least in the live action version, there is a sequence to that. It doesn't all just happen. Like the pumpkin happens first, and then
But we don't care. It can run in any order. We don't care how it runs, right?
right, yeah,
It
we
can go parallel.
yeah. I mean, if you want to parallelize that in your system design, then that's. Having done this exercise many times, there is actually a race condition later that you'll have to deal with. That's way more important than this.
Is it who drives the coach? The coach already exists.
Well, that is like there is an issue there, right? Like, why change the mice into coachmen if there's no coach like that? But anyway, so I did want to point out something that Gordon, you mentioned that there were things you remembered from the last session. I thought that was kind of cool that because I see that in in other sessions with businesses as well, is because it's such a visual thing, whether it's sticky notes on a wall or something like this, it's more memorable for people. The conversations tend to be more memorable because of the visual nature of it. And I love that I could leave the room for 10 minutes to take a family photo and come back, and it's still moving along here. This is like mob event storming remotely.
Yeah. Which is funny because this last project I'm working on, our lead was really regretting that we couldn't do like a real event storming session and stuff like that. It's like, this is working okay.
Yeah, this doesn't feel to me that different. I think some things are a little slower, but some things are also faster. Like moving stickies is much faster. Like groups of stickies is a lot faster because of that. So here's an area where I always find it gets interesting, right? So I mentioned a race condition, so I was half joking. So there's a literal race condition because Cinderella ran away, right? But why did she run away? So I had added that as a pink sticky earlier, is because this is like with a lot of business processes, like there's when we talk about emergent structure. So one of the things I always look for at the start is like key events. What are the key events in the story, right? So what are some key events in the story here?
Well, I was thinking the same thing, that nobody really identified in the previous session. We didn't call out explicitly there was a hard stop. That at midnight, all this stuff went away. And she suddenly realized that, oh my gosh, there's this deadline. All this stuff is going to go away. I got to go, you know? And so that's like the huge pivot point in the story, is that, you know, the magic ends at midnight.
Right.
Yeah. And when I've used this example before, one of the things that came up was one of the events that got added was not just that the fairy godmother showed up, but it was like rules stated or something. I can't remember how they phrased it exactly, but it was that the fairy godmother specifically said, you can go to the party, you can dance. When the clock strikes midnight, everything's going to change back. You know, you need to be ready to go.
Right. So what that actually is a policy. You don't have a color for that right now, but let me make one. So somewhere, whoops.
You can make it into a wide sticky if you want.
Yeah, I'll just copy the tech question one for now. So the policy is stated much earlier in the story. Like, where's the policy stated about the magic running out?
Somewhere right in here.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and what was the policy?
The magic ends at midnight. All of these transitions down here end. They have a lifetime, and they end here.
Yeah, so let me pick a color for that. What's a nice color for that? Ooh, that's pretty. Okay, and who said the magic ends at midnight? Like, whose business rule is that? Is that sales? Is that marketing? Is that?
That's the godmother.
It's intrinsic to the magic.
Yeah.
I mean, the fairy godmother stated it.
Yeah, so that's down.
She said it somewhere around when she did the magic.
I feel like the fairy godmother's pretty much like the CFO or something, you know? It's
right.
Not quite in charge, but pretty much in charge of a lot.
Okay, so I'll just put it in that general area. It's the magic ends at midnight, right? So that's why this stuff happens further down here, that the clock. So, like with this is why I use this example sometimes and go in a little bit more depth, is because you see this in real businesses as well, is you have this vague business policy, like the magic runs out at midnight. But midnight is actually a long-running process. It takes 12 bongs in this story. And so you have a race condition. Like, every time, like, people always describe this as the clock struck midnight, but the clock doesn't strike midnight. It actually strikes midnight multiple, like, it, you know, there's 12 bongs, and while that's happening, the magic runs out, right? Which is why she drops the slipper. And so that, you know, business rules have exceptions too, because apparently the slipper stayed, like the magic didn't run out for that. Every business rule has its exceptions. So I always find the Cinderella story is kind of, it's fun, but it also helps highlight these types of things as well, because real business processes are like that, right? They're ambiguous often. They may involve long-running processes or approval processes, and there are always exceptions. Yeah, so while the clock's bonging midnight, like, her clothes fell apart, her outfit expired, yeah, all of that kind of stuff. And then at the clock completed the midnight chime, and then she returned home. But see, the clock bonging is actually an independent long-running process of everything that's happening to Cinderella.
Right.
Just like a real business process would be, right? Where there's something that's happening that's independent of all these other things, but they're independent, but they are related.
Paul, do you have do you have a notation for duration? Like, here's a stretch of time where things are happening, and they get, maybe even happen in any order, but sort of like, here's the duration for this thing. Do you just make like a longer box maybe, and just say this is the duration when these things happen?
Yeah, there's no super hard. Like, EventStorming is a really flexible format, and what I find is, like, every workshop I run is a little bit different. Different things come up, and so we just come up with different notation for that. I've seen, like, for date-based things, you could use, like, draw something on the sticky, or maybe in Miro there's like a little calendar icon or something like that, or time icon that you could put on a sticky note. What's nice about Miro is, like, you probably got an near infinite set of icons you can use for things. So the clock starts midnight chime should probably actually be clock started, because it's past tense. Is what you
Regarding
want.
this policy, I'm just thinking, like, in a software design. So in this case, like, the godmother, she states the policy. She kind of lets them know this is what the policy is, but it feels like it doesn't actually kick in until the midnight chime.
That's right.
So is it really a policy back here where the fairy godmother states it? Or, like, if it was a software design and it was, hey, we're going to tell you that this is going to expire in 10 minutes, but the expiration actually happens here, would we represent that as two policies, or the same sticky policy in two places?
It's a great conversation, right? Like, if I said to you that you can make a withdrawal from your account, but it doesn't get reconciled against the other transactions until the nightly processing, the policy is in force all the time, but it's not actually enacted until the nightly processing, right? Because you know that when you make deposits and withdrawals in your bank account, that you see a running total, but those don't actually get applied as real transactions. That's probably not the right term, but Josh probably know better. But, like, those banking transactions are actually applied for real as part of the nightly processing. Yeah. And a lot of policies are like that.
An ever-present constraint to the calculation or the output of the value.
Right. They function, a policies. Matthias has talked about policies just being like another form of constraint on a system. Like a business rule is a form of constraint. And I mean, there are lots of others, right? So I'm just trying to think, like with a credit card, I'll pick another transaction, financial one. So you get charged interest on a credit card, and that policy is stated in the terms and conditions of your credit card that you get charged interest if you carry over a balance. But that interest doesn't actually get calculated and applied until the policy is actually carried out by the software. And this is a bit like that, right? The fairy godmother says, okay, there's this constraint that you're going to have to work with, which Cinderella completely forgets about until she hears the clock start. Sorry, right? That's how business rules tend to work too, right?
Loyalty event. Types of products at any time from this time period, you will be charged X. You will get X number of points and charge X number of interest rate on that particular product. You want to buy a Louis Vuitton purse from April to June, you'll get 10 times the points, and interest rate will be waived until the end of that particular period. Like, it's present for that time period, not ever present for explicitly bounded time period. If you make that purchase from that time. So if an event occurs within this time, apply this policy. There's another view of that.
Okay.
And I'm not so much concerned when I'm doing a session like this. I'm less concerned about everyone sticking strictly to the conventions. I'm more concerned about the conversations that are happening as a result of that, because I see this as a structured conversation, right? It's a game that we're playing that has certain rules about the colors and things like that, some of which we make up as we go along. And what we're trying to do is to come up with a shared understanding of this, whether it's modeling an existing process, kind of like we're doing here, or coming up with how a process should work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going to have to head out of here. Are you guys going to make it to Actors and Systems tonight, or is that another thing you're going to be doing?
Part 3.
Part 3, great. I'm going to watch out on the meetup. It was really nice meeting you guys. I have a lot of reading to do, but I'll hope to see you next time.
All right.
Thanks.
Patrick,
All
thanks
right.
for joining.
Thanks,
Bye,
Patrick.
guys.
So, Paul, is it useful to record sessions, or is that just more information that you never get to?
So I had a client last year that we did a big picture event storming where we mapped out an entire value stream for them, and there were people that really wanted to be part of it but couldn't. And so they asked if they could set up a camera and record the whole thing. And so I said, sure, and so there were people that jumped on at various times, where particularly when we were doing like more like a readout, where we would stop and then I'd have people take turns sort of telling the story. That's a good point for people to join and kind of see what's been learned. But they were more observers than, and it was recorded. I'm not sure what they did with that recording after the fact. But the people on the call weren't actually participating in the event storming. I think that would
Right.
have been
I guess it's
tricky.
more of a question of, are you capturing things that you may not have gotten down well in the sticky notes, or something you learn by later if you just kind of do a walkthrough at the end where someone narrates it, right? It's like, here's what we came up with.
Mm-hmm.
And is that valuable? Or,
I'm kind of interested in how that sort of plays out going forward, because I've had some teams. What Miro allows you to do is the artifact you're creating actually is persistent, whereas, as Josh said, with the actual sticky notes on a sheet of paper, that doesn't endure quite so easily. So it would be possible, I think, to send someone a link to this Miro board later and walk them through it. Whether or not, so if they don't participate in it, then that's probably your option. What I do find sometimes is you end up with a lot of questions around certain areas, and that usually indicates that the person that knew that area well was not in the meeting. And so we may schedule a follow-up with them to just kind of walk through that part of it, right? Is that what you're getting at, or?
yeah, I guess so. I think to some degree that, one issue I run into is just, information overload.
Yeah.
Everyone's always concerned with, capturing everything. And it seems like you have to revisit, and that's the thing with user stories. I mean, you have to keep revisiting them.
Right.
And people come up with new ideas all the time. But in some ways, it's kind of like I've seen it kind of recommended as like with a user story map, to kind of do a walkthrough, and it's kind of like the walkthrough tour of the people who were there at the time. So it might capture the essence,
Right.
with it, and give people a quick tour. But not certainly the whole session wouldn't be worthwhile because who could ever dig through it to find it. But maybe a little video introduction is useful, and if you could kind of walk through this and do a voiceover, that might be.
Yeah, I had a team in the Bay Area that they did this as part of a Project Inception. They'd flown people in from like all over the place and did an event storming session, and so they would at the end of that, one of them grabbed a smartphone and the other one just kind of walked it through as just a video capture of what they'd done, telling the whole story of all of this and highlighting areas where there were questions and things like that. And that was kind of cool because from what I understand, they then used that as they kept that video and used it as an onboarding tool for new developers. So when people joined the team, they said, hey, you know, this was our level of understanding when we started this project back whenever the inception was, and we've learned a lot since then, but at least watch this and you'll get a sense of where we were at, and then I can get you up to speed with what we've learned since then and what's changed since then. And I think video is a really powerful tool that probably isn't used enough for this type of thing. I've done time lapses of quite a few of the sessions that I've run as well, which is a nice way of sort of capturing some of the energy of it. There was something else I was going to say.
I like the onboarding idea. That seems pretty valuable, actually.
Yeah, well, I ran a session last year down in the Yeah, exactly. I ran a session down in the Springs where it was a big picture EventStorming. It was an all-day thing, and the idea was at the end of the day, we had, like Josh has got here, we had value and opportunities, and basically used that to guide what everyone did on the second day of the workshop, which was more solution focused. And at the end of that first day, the people that were in the workshop went upstairs and grabbed their managers and brought them down and kind of walked them through it, did a bit of show and tell. And that was really illuminating, because some of the managers were saying, well, you know, of this 30 foot of wall space, like my team does like 2 feet of it, right? And it just is so helpful to see like everything that's happening upstream from us. There was a whole section where there was just a ton of manual busy work that was being done, and it was the first time that some of them had seen that manual busy work was being caused by things that were not being caught further, like 20 feet up the wall, right? And I mean, a lot of, I think, enterprises are like that, where, you know, people work in their silos and they're not optimizing for you know, what might be happening downstream from them, because they just don't know.
No, I feel like I'm in one of those right now, where I think there's a ton of stuff that happens manually because people just don't, whoever's in charge of that process doesn't realize, you know, who depends on them and what their goal is, you know.
Yeah.
And they may not even be vested in the process, you know. I can completely see that coming out. If you stretched out the entire business on one wall and said, you know, here's what we do, I think a lot of that stuff just gets shaken out.
Mm-hmm. This is pretty cool, because it looks like I'm zooming out and I'm comparing step 1 with step 2, and it's night and day.
It's cool.
So I'm going to need to drop off soon and spend some time with my family. Thanks so much to you guys for participating, especially Josh, for you organizing this. This is really cool.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate you joining. Next episode, we're going to be a little fluent with the schedule based on what happens, but we could play with this for quite some time, and we could jump into the next thing. It was all around, no idea how it would go, but we'll see how it goes.
I think this is great. I like this tool.
Yeah. No, this was instructive in that we can do this virtually and have a lot of good conversations like we had last time, where we're all in person. And then also, just the process of seeing how you shape all these cards, which I felt like we had sort of shaped into, well, gee, yeah, this is the story. And it's like, oh yeah, no, we left it this way, but there's more work to do.
Right.
Yeah. A lot of work to do.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm gonna drop off here. So
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm gonna drop too.
until
Thank you,
next
guys.
time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks a lot, Josh.
Yeah, I think I'm going to.
Cool.
Dinner's ready.
Thanks, Deb. Have a good night.
Good to see
Have
you.
a good one.
Have fun.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.